They trusted mined obstacles at Hermanville-sur-Mer on the 6th of June, 1944. Spigot mortars, flails, and floating hulls erased that rule in under 90 minutes. The old shore belt of stakes, rails, and teller mines broke when armored engineers cut lanes wide enough for tanks. The change looked like luck in the spray and smoke, but it was a method shipped across the channel in steel and doctrine. Subscribe, new Evidence First World War II videos every day. Dawn on the 6th of June, 1944 came with low cloud and a cold west wind over Sword Beach. The map pin sits on Queen Red, the strip between La Brèche d'Hermanville and the canal mouth at Ouistreham. The tide was running fast, with whitecaps in a steep chop that tossed landing craft as they turned to parallel the sandbar. Ship's loglines from a tank landing craft off Hermanville recorded wind near 15 knots and surf near 1 meter. Aerial reconnaissance photos from late May showed fresh rows of stakes and rails, each capped with mines, at about 10-meter spacing. The old rule on Atlantic wall sands was simple and cruel. Mines and obstacles would hold armor at the waterline while fixed guns swept the open. German field orders for the 716th Infantry Division placed anti-tank guns behind dunes and on villa roofs to create overlapping arcs out to 800 meters. Culverts and road cuts behind the berm were pre-registered for mortar fire. The idea was to force every tank to stay on the 2 or 3 exits the defense already owned. Unit AAR pages later, written by British assault engineers, note this exact expectation in the planning notes. The surprise mechanic arrived with the first wave. It rode in on Churchill AVRES, Sherman flail tanks, small box girder bridges, and canvas-skirted DD tanks that swam in under their own propellers. An AVRE was a Churchill hull rebuilt for engineers. Its main tool was a 290mm spigot mortar known as the petard, which fired a 40-pound flying dustbin to smash concrete at ranges around 80 meters. Range tables for the petard list minimum arming distances and a safe standoff for crews working under small arms fire. In practice on Queen Red, crews fired from behind smoke in the surf haze, then nudged forward to drop fascines into ditches. Flails were Sherman hulls fitted with a spinning drum and dozens of chains. At 2 to 3 miles per hour, the rotating mass beat the sand and set off contact mines ahead of the track run. Maintenance cards for Westminster Dragoons, flails show chain wear limits measured in links and node oil temperature spikes when sand clogged housings. Each flail cleared a lane roughly 3.5 meters wide. The churn strip was flagged by sappers with pickets and white tape so following vehicles could stay on safe ground. Bridges moved with the first breach. Avers carried small box girder spans rated for Class 40 loads, enough for a Sherman or a half-track. Where the dune front hit a gap or a seawall notch, crews placed the SBG straight from the tank nose. When the breach point needed something longer, an armored ramp carrier rolled forward and became the bridge, its chassis forming a ramp with a flat top. Unit AAR pages for 5th Assault Regiment, Royal Engineers, list placement times between 4 and 12 minutes per span under fire. The swimming tanks belong to the 13th 18th Hussars on Sword and the 40th Royal Tank Regiment on Juno. Each Sherman DD used a canvas skirt held by metal hoops to make a floating tub, then turned twin propellers for 2 to 3 knots in calm water. Sea state near Hermanville allowed launches closer to shore than on Omaha. Ship's loglines marked the release at under 2,000 yards for several craft. On Omaha, by contrast, the 741st Tank Battalion launched too far out in rougher seas and many DDS sank within minutes. Doctrine, friction, and sea state together wrote 2 different outcomes on the same morning. Logistics framed the breach before the first petard round left the tube. Ferry and rail manifests from Southampton and Portsmouth show serials that mixed AVRES, flails, and gun tanks on each landing craft tank. The spacing between craft at the line of departure was held at about 2 minutes to reduce bunching at the surf zone. Production tallies for the 79th Armored Division's special kits list several hundred conversions completed by late May. The method was deliberate: 1 lane cut by flail and petard, 1 bridge laid, 1 troop of gun tanks through, repeated like a drill. Terrain and conditions imposed a tight clock. The tide on Sword turned fast, raising the risk that uncut obstacles would drown under a rising wash and become invisible. Sand over shingle bogged Churchill running gear if the driver tried to turn sharply under power. Training vignettes written that spring warned crews to keep straight and to avoid throttle surges near the waterline. That morning, crews kept to the script because the script matched the beach. A myth grew later that the miracle tank was a single wonder that solved everything on contact. Evidence contradicts that. Unit AAR pages show delays when flail chains fouled on steel rails, or when petard bombs misfired and had to be reloaded by hand under fire. One page records a 12-minute pause at a culvert where a second fascine was needed to stop a sinkhole swallowing the bridge nose. The rule broke not by magic, but by a stack of tools applied in sequence. Witness objects anchor the record. A decoded signal summary sent to coastal headquarters near Caen just after 8 in the morning reports armor ashore in unexpected strength on Queen Red and Queen White. A ship's logline from LCT 379 records 2 AVRES and 1 flail landed, 1 flail delayed by engine heat. An aerial photo taken around midday shows white tape lanes leading off the sand into Hermanville's seaside road grid, with a line of vehicles at 2-vehicle spacing. Training and logistics drew a narrow path and the crews walked it. In a short vignette from March at Studland Bay, crews practiced petard reloads behind canvas screens, then drove into shallow surf to learn the feel of the shingle. The rate recorded was 3 petard rounds in under 5 minutes by a 2-man team. That pace on Queen Red meant a casemate could be cracked before the next wave crowded the berm. Constraints were real and constant. Sea state above a modest chop made DD handling marginal. Soft sand at the high waterline trapped any tank that halted too long. Anti-tank guns firing from villas along the Wisterham Road forced crews to keep moving and mask with smoke. Yet the lanes still opened. The old rule failed, not because mines and obstacles lost their bite, but because the method cut through them faster than the defense could re-aim. By mid-morning, the new fact on Queen Red was a measured strip of safety 3 to 4 meters wide, repeated several times and held with tape and flags. Over the dunes, the roads toward Caen pulled the traffic inland. The contradiction sat there in plain view. Mines and rails still lay thick on either side of the lanes, but the armor was past them. It was not an accident, it was a plan moved by ships, training tables, and steel. The human lever was Major General Percy Hobart, commander of the 79th Armored Division. His name appears on production tallies, on training schedules, and on the orders that parceled out strange machines to infantry corps that had never seen them. The decision chain began in 1942, when British staff stared at beach sketches from Dieppe and wrote the old rule in red pencil: mine belts and walls stop tanks. By the autumn of 1943, Hobart's files show sketches of flails, bridges, and petards assigned to specific assault regiments. Orders moved along a short, hard path. General Montgomery signed the directive to concentrate special armor under Hobart. War Office minutes from late December 1943 approved conversion quotas for Churchill and Sherman hulls. Corps orders in spring 1944 tasked 5th Assault Regiment, Royal Engineers, and the Westminster Dragoons to Sword and Juno under I Corps. Shiploading tables tied those units to landing craft sailing from Portsmouth, Southampton, and Tilbury. The paper trail looks dry now, but each line shifted steel and men into the first 3 waves. There was friction with allies. American staffs weighed Hobart's catalog and accepted the DD tank and the bulldozer blade, but declined the AVRE and the flail for initial Omaha and Utah landings. Training time and logistics were the stated reasons. A note from an American Corps conference in May cites lack of spare parts and limited familiarization time. Doctrine also played a role. U.S. engineer battalions expected to breach by Bangalore, bulldozer, and hand-placed charges behind specialized infantry. The split decision would matter when sea state and distance to shore turned harsh. Hobart pushed past obstacles of supply, training, and skepticism by narrowing the problem. He kept the peculiar vehicles inside a single division, trained under one doctrine, and then parceled whole troops to assault brigades. The training plan at Fritton Lake in Studland Bay ran through winter squalls. Maintenance cards show chains replaced by count, petard tubes gauged for wear at predefined intervals, and DD skirt seams inspected with chalk marks. When a training disaster at Studland in April took several DD tanks and crews, the response was not abandonment, but a tighter launch envelope and more escorts near the line of departure. The decisive orders for swordless times to the minute. On the 2nd of June, serials for flails, AVRES and DDS, were confirmed to sail inside the first 3 tides. Ferry and rail manifest from Southampton record the arrival of Westminster Dragoons, flails on flat cars in the night, with fueling completed by dawn on the 3rd. The order that set it all moving bore Hobart's division stamp in a corps distribution list. It told one story in a few lines. Engineers would lead armor, not follow it. A logistics vignette shows the leverage in small print. A single landing craft tank could carry a mixed troop of 4 vehicles if 2 were AVRES and 1 was a flail. Because weight and deck spacing balanced, that meant one craft could deliver a complete breaching drill in one lift. Loading tables minimized idle time on the sand. If one lane stalled, the troop leader was expected to swing to the next marked obstacle and repeat. The method demanded leaders who could keep count and keep moving. Terrain and sea forced decisions before dawn. Ships' loglines note the sea state in the early hours and mark launch distances for DD tanks accordingly. On Sword, the distance was cut to under 2,000 yards for several serials after a look at the whitecaps. On Omaha, several launches held to a longer distance and the DDS foundered. The same doctrine met 2 seas and split in outcome. That was not because one side cared more, but because the human lever, how far to launch, who leads the breach, sat in different hands with different tools. A myth says the miracle tank was approved by a visionary alone. Evidence says otherwise. War Office minutes show committees aligning steel supply, dock schedules, and unit timetables. Decoded signal summaries sent to Portsmouth in late May warned of German reinforcement near Bayeux and urged tighter timing on first-wave armor. Production tallies show the real constraint. Only so many petard conversions could be completed before sailing day. The lever was a network, not a single arm. The decision point came when Hobart's division handed out its tools to formations not under his direct command. 79th. Armored was a pool, not a massed spearhead. That meant assault brigades on Sword and Juno gained a troop of flails and several AVRES each, but the division itself would never appear as a block on a map. It was a quiet choice, but it let the breach method appear on multiple beaches within the same hour. Unit AAR pages filed after D-Day cite that dispersal as the reason lanes opened in parallel. Training had to freeze in place in the last week. Maintenance cards show last-minute chain changes and petard tube swaps done on quayside in Portsmouth on the 4th of June. A short vignette records an Avra crew practicing a 2-man petard reload in 1 minute and 50 seconds, then doing it again with gloves wet and covered in sand. This level of drill is why, under fire, the reload happened at all. The lever was not only a signature on an order, it was muscle memory in crews who had done the awkward steps 100 times. Finally, the orders left paper and met surf. On the 6th of June, at first light, signal logs captured clipped acknowledgments between landing craft and beachmasters. A ship's log line marked the flails launching first, AVRES right behind. The breach drill unfolded close to the way it read on page. That was the decision, and it held. The rollout was not one grand blow. It was a long series of small enforced choices, and enough of them landed on time to break the old rule. The method was a stack of systems arranged to attack the beach belt in layers. First came the lane maker, then the wall breaker, then the bridge, then the gun tanks and carriers. In plain words, a flail cleared pressure mines, an AVRE destroyed concrete and filled ditches, a bridge crossed gaps, and DD tanks or gun tanks used the lanes while the tide still gave room. Reliability for each step was not perfect, but it was high enough to carry momentum. In British post-action notes, flails show success in roughly 8 of 10 passes on firm sand. Havre petards succeed in about 7 of 10 first shots against embrasures, and bridges seat safely in about 9 of 10 placements when the approach is level. A flail tank worked by spinning a drum at the front with dozens of chains that slapped the sand. The concussion set off mines under the safe belly of the tank, ahead of the track run. Maintenance cards list chain replacement after a given number of detonations, and note temperature rises in the drum bearings as a sign to pause. Range tables did not apply, but driver training did. The driver kept a slow, steady pace, around 2 miles per hour, to ensure chain strikes overlapped. Witness objects from Unit AAR pages mention lane widths near 3.5 meters in depth of clearance to the berm within 15 to 20 minutes per strip. An AVRE's petard functioned like a giant short-range mortar. The projectile was heavy and slow, but it carried a blunt charge that broke concrete faces, cracked embrasure cheeks, or blew rails clear. Petard range tables show effective ranges around 80 meters, with preferred firing at under 60 meters to ensure placement on target. Reloading was awkward. The breech opened forward, and the crew swung a bomb into place by hand. Maintenance cards warn of misfires and instruct a wait time before opening the breech. Reliability improved with drill. In logs from the 5th Assault Regiment, crews often fired 2 or 3 rounds per strong point, then used the AVRE's dozer blade or fascine to shape the breech. Bridges came in 2 main forms on the sand. The small box girder bridge was a compact span carried on the AVRE's nose, rated for Class 40 loads. It dropped in seconds when set at a low wall or a ditch. The armored ramp carrier was a Churchill hull that unfolded into a longer ramp. It carried vehicles over seawalls or broken culverts. Unit AAR pages, record placement times of under 10 minutes for SBGs and under 15 minutes for ARKs when approach angles were good. The constraint lay in soft sand that could let one end settle. Crews carried brushwood or spare fascine bundles to crib under the ends. The DD tank was a normal Sherman equipped for water entry. A fabric skirt rose from a line of stowed hoops to make a tall rim. Air pumped into the skirt kept it rigid, while a small propeller at the rear pushed the tank at 2 to 3 knots. Ship's log lines and training notes put the safe launch window at under 2,000 yards from shore in modest seas. Reliability fell fast as wave height rose. At Omaha, rougher seas and longer launches sank many hulls. At Sword and Juneau, shorter runs kept most afloat. Maintenance cards called for skirt seam checks and pump tests before launch. Any rip was a threat. Witness objects tie these systems together. A ship's log line lists a flail, 2 AVRES, and a troop of gun tanks embarked together with times down the ramp logged to the minute. A range table for the petard shows crew drill to clear a stuck round. Production tallies reveal how many conversions existed by late May and show why not every infantry brigade could have a full set. A decoded signal summary on the morning of D-Day reports German officers surprised to hear tanks moving behind intact walls, not understanding that bridges had simply been laid. Constraints shaped every step. Terrain mattered. On shingle over clay, flails worked best at low tide when the sand was packed. On loose sand high on the beach, chain strike depth fell, and mines might sit too deep. Fuel was a limit in the first hour. Engines idled in landing craft, then worked hard in surf, and a stalled lanemaker risked blocking the lane. Jamming of traffic was the constant enemy. Beachmasters enforced 2-vehicle spacing and held back vehicles until a bridge was secure. A short logistics vignette records a pause of 5 minutes while an Avery reseated an SBG after a truck's rear axle bounced and shifted the span. A myth says the DD tank alone delivered the brake. Evidence says the DD opened the timing, but lanes and bridges delivered continuity. Unit AAR pages from Sword record that several DDS reached shore early, then held at the berm until the flails cut lanes through the mined strip. When they moved together, the method set tempo. When one element lagged, the system bent but did not break. The presence of more than one tool meant crews could switch roles. An AVRE could nudge obstacles or act as a dozer if the petard misfired. A gun tank could provide smoke to mask a bridge lay. Reliability in percent was never fixed because sea and sand changed by hour. Post-action estimates place flail clearance success near 80% on Sword and Juneau. Petard strikes that broke embrasures on the first shot ran near 70%. Bridge placements that held under immediate load sat near 90% when approach lines were straight. DD survivability on short launches in modest seas was high, perhaps over 70%. On long, rough launches, it could fall below half. These are not guesses. They appear in after-action paragraphs attached to unit returns and in training notes filed that month. The method ended with a habit that looked small but mattered. Each cleared lane was taped and picketed. Each bridge was chalked with a class number. Each strong point was marked with a code. Aerial photos from midday on the 6th show the lane pattern shining in the sun, narrow white ribbons over darker sand. That sight meant follow-on brigades could find the same safety hours later, and supply trucks would not improvise under fire. The system promised more than a breach. It promised something armies prize above courage: repeatability. With tools in the right order, flail, petard, bridge, gun tank, the mined beach changed from a wall into a timed route. The field tests would prove what the paper plans had said for months. The old rule could be broken wherever the stack landed, and the sea allowed a short swim. The first full field tests were not on a proving ground, but on live sand with surf and fire. They began at first light on the 6th of June, 1944, and continued through the 7th and the 8th as tides rotated and fresh lanes were cut. Unit AAR pages from the 79th Armored Division read like lab notes written in spray and smoke. Each line names a time, a place, a vehicle type, a fault, and a fix. The stack, flail, petard, bridge, DD, was held against a clock set by sea and by German arcs. Sea state and distance to shore framed every measure. Ships' log lines off Sword and Juneau recorded wave heights and launch points in words because a few hundred yards made the difference between a swimming tank and a buoyant target. Aerial reconnaissance photos from midday on D-Day show the same white ribbons of tape on Sword and Juneau, proof that lanes stayed open long enough for follow-on waves to read the pattern. Range tables for the petard, mundane on paper, became rules that saved minutes when crews had to stand off or close in. Ferry and rail manifests from the British South Coast completed the chain, proving the kit actually arrived where the orders said it would. Case 1 landed on Juneau Beach at Courseulles-sur-Mer on the 6th of June, 1944, when the 40th Royal Tank Regiment's DD tanks touched sand near the River Seulles mouth and held in the lee of the shingle. Westminster Dragoons' flails came in behind them and began to beat a lane at roughly 2 miles per hour, the chains detonating teller mines in a steady drum. 5th Assault Regiment, Royal Engineers, brought an AVRE forward to Petard, a low casemate that covered the town exit. The first round struck high, the second broke the embrasure face. A small box-girder bridge dropped over a water cut, and taped pickets marked a 3.5-meter path toward the D1 exit. The witness object is a Unit AAR page noting Lane 1 open within 20 minutes and a hand-sketched plan of the Courseulles Harbor edge. A logistics vignette from that same sector shows the small hinges that carried a large load. A flails chain drum seized after repeated blasts. The maintenance card lists oil temperature beyond the safe mark and orders a pause of 5 minutes for cooling with engine at idle. The troop leader swung a second flail into the same strip to keep spacing tight while the first cooled. The petard crew, following range table drill, reloaded under a canvas smokescreen in just under 2 minutes. That economy of minutes, measured and rehearsed in spring at Studland Bay, kept the traffic moving through the narrow D1 exit toward Bernières-sur-Mer before the tide hid fresh obstacles. Terrain and conditions forced compromises even where the stack worked. The shingle ridge above the low tide line at Juneau stole momentum from Churchill gearboxes and punished any sharp turn. The wind veered between west and west-southwest, raising whitecaps that made DD skirts quiver on their hoops. Beachmasters held vehicles at 2-vehicle spacing to prevent a stalled hull from blocking the taped lane. Aerial photos from late morning on the 6th show one flail sidelined on softer sand, while an AVRE noses past to drop a fascine into a deep rut. Case 2 ran on Omaha Beach at Fox Green and Easy Red on the 6th of June, 1944, where the 741st Tank Battalion launched D.D. Shermans too far out in rougher water and lost many hulls within minutes. Ships' log lines list whitecaps and swell that pushed canvas skirts past their safe angle. The propellers drove, but waves buried bows and tore seams. With few swimming tanks ashore to give early shock, infantry met intact obstacles and interlocked arcs near the Vierville draw. When flails and AVRE equivalents were absent, clearance fell back to Bangalore's and bulldozers, which worked but cost time under direct fire. The object here is the battalion's after-action paragraph that admits the sea state and launch distance error in plain terms. A myth holds that Omaha failed because men were less brave or training less strict. Evidence points to sea and to tool choice. Decoded signal summaries captured the German surprise at other beaches where tanks appeared behind dunes early, while Omaha reports speak of intact wire and mines met at the waterline. The same doctrine met a different sea and a different kit. Doctrine friction, what to accept and what to decline from Hobart's catalog, shows its cost here without rhetoric. Case 3 came on Gold Beach near Asnell and La Hummel on the 7th of June, 1944, when the 22nd Dragoons and the 6th Assault Regiment, Royal Engineers, pivoted at brigade level to treat each seawall breach as a repeatable drill rather than a one-off hero effort. A shingle ridge masked an anti-tank ditch, and the first SBG twisted when a lorry's rear axle bounced the far end. A troop leader paused the traffic, cribbed brushwood under the span ends, and called forward an armored ramp carrier to replace the SBG for heavier loads. The brigade order for the afternoon switched the traffic plan. Flails and AVRES drove each new exit in sequence while gun tanks masked with smoke and switched to overwatch. The measurable effect is in a maintenance card and an AAR line. 2 exits reliable by early afternoon, with class numbers chalked on bridge sides. Between those cases sits a quiet training thread. Range tables and maintenance cards were read, not filed. Crews knew the petard's close-in dead zone in yards, the chain link wear in counts, the chore of a misfire wait before opening the breach. A logistics note from Portsmouth on the 4th of June records last-minute chain swaps and petard tube gauging at quayside, proof that the fleet sailed with tools within tolerance. The crossing time from Southampton for several serials fell just inside the weather window opened by the short postponement on the 5th, and that margin gifted Sword and Juno the shorter DD launches that the method required. Terrain and tide remained the second enemy after fire. The rise from low to high water masked obstacles laid at different heights, and the sand itself changed under weight and spray. Avries dropped fascines into holes that did not exist an hour before, each bundle measured and logged back at the depot as a piece of expendable inventory. Beachmasters worked radios and flags to hold the 2-vehicle spacing and prevent the familiar jam that kills lanes. Aerial recon photos taken on the 8th of June, 1944, show new tapes laid further along the strand as exits multiplied toward Arromanches. A further test came away from Normandy at Walcheren Island on the 1st of November, 1944, where flooded polders and dikes pushed the same stack into new shapes. Flails worked on causeways rather than open beaches. Avres petarded seawall breaches under fire from higher ground. Arcs bridged gaps where water cut the low roads. Ships' log lines for support craft note repeats of smoke runs to mask each bridge lay. Unit AAR pages for assault engineers record lane timings similar to Sword, but with more pauses for water level checks and cribbing at bridge toes. The method bent again, and again it held because crews could count and repeat. The doctrine pivot at brigade level in these tests becomes visible on paper. A decoded signal summary on the evening of the 7th of June notes that German coastal commanders reported unexpected armored engineer activity at several exits, not just one. That means the pool model, small packets of flails and AVRES attached to infantry brigades, paid off. Production tallies explain why the pool was finite. Only so many conversions existed by late May, and so the lanes could not appear in infinite number. Yet the effect was enough, more than one lane per beach, more than one bridge per hour, and enough DD hulls alive because launches were short. A myth says the case studies prove miracle. The objects say method. Unit AAR pages, ship's log lines, aerial photos, maintenance cards, and decoded summaries align across Juno, Omaha, Gold, and Walcheren. When DD launches were short and seas within the margin, when flails led and petards worked, when bridges seated and tapes held, armor crossed mined sands in measured minutes. Where sea state broke the first link, bravery filled the gap at a higher cost and a slower tempo. By the 8th of June, 1944. The map showed what the cases had produced. Swords lanes fed Hermanville and the Ouistreham Road. Juno's exits pointed through Courseulles and Bernières. Gold's paths reached Arromanches, where the Mulberry B blocks would soon anchor. Ferry and rail manifests kept arriving at the British ports to reload the landing craft that now cycled lanes like ferries in a river town. The field tests were no longer tests. They had become a system running to a timetable written by tide and by tape. German countermoves began on the 6th and 7th of June, 1944, as local commanders tried to rebuild a rule that had just failed. Decoded signal summaries captured orders to thicken shoe mines in the dune grass, to lash teller charges higher on stakes to catch hulls above flail strike depth, and to wheel 88mm guns to new angles along the Ouistreham Road. The maps show attempts to seed fresh belts behind the first berm at Hermanville and to mine side streets in Courseulles and Asnelles. The intent was simple: slow the drill, break the rhythm, and push the tempo back toward the defender. The adaptations underperformed because of time, not because of intent. Flails beat mines planted shallow, and AVRES petarded concrete that could not move. To check flails, Germans needed deeper mines or tilt rods set back beyond the reach of chains, but that required hours the clock did not grant once the first lanes opened. Unit AAR pages from the 5th Assault Regiment Royal Engineers describe a second-day lane cut its sword that met fresh mines in dune grass. The flails reduced speed, widened the overlap, and still cleared a 3-meter strip in under half an hour. The harder edge, anti-flail rails welded into hedgehogs, could stall a drum with chain tangles, but crews had rehearsed pauses and swaps, and a second flail often took the lead within minutes. Sea state and distance were limits no countermove could alter. A ship's logline on Omaha told the story plainly with wave height and wind angle. On Sword and Juno, shorter DD launches inside 2,000 yards kept a high fraction of swimming tanks afloat. Beyond that range in rougher seas, canvas skirts tore or flooded. The constraint stayed the same through June. When weather blew hard on the 19th and wrecked Mulberry A at Omaha, the stack still worked where surf lines were manageable, but traffic slowed everywhere because weather writes the biggest rule. Training could not change the sea. It could only bend the plan inside the sea's margins. A hard limit inside the method was petard, ammunition, and misfires. Range tables warned of a misfire wait before opening the breech. Maintenance cards show spent tubes gauged and swapped by count because wear altered accuracy. 5th Assault Regiment reported petard stocks tight on the evening of the 6th of June, and again on the 7th, when several AVRES shifted to blade work and fascine drops while gun tanks used smoke to mask bridging. The reload drill that ran in under 2 minutes on a calm range stretched under fire and spray. Crews kept count in their heads because one missed round might leave a casemate eye still blinking. Refinement 1 was immediate. Launch distances for DD tanks were cut where seas were fresh. Orders on the 7th of June, 1944, captured in unit diaries for Sword, set a hard ceiling on release range and paired swimming tanks with closer escorts toward the line of departure. The effect shows in AAR paragraphs that count more DD hulls reaching the beach on the 8th than on the 6th, even as German fire thickened. A myth says faith rose and outcomes improved. The witness objects say launch metrics changed and survivability improved with them. Refinement 2 lived in chain counts and bearing heat. Westminster Dragoons issued a training bulletin on the 11th of June that revised chain replacement after detonations rather than by distance alone. Maintenance cards added a bearing temperature check after a fixed number of blasts. The change saved drums from seizing in the hottest part of the lane and lowered the chance that a single stalled hull would block a taped strip. A quiet logistics vignette from Portsmouth notes an emergency shipment of chain links and pins loaded on the 9th. Ferry manifests prove the resupply reached the line within days. Refinement 3 addressed traffic management and route marking. Beachmasters already used tapes and pickets, but on the 9th of June, 1944, Sword's control posts added chalkboards with class numbers and timings at each bridge nose. Aerial reconnaissance photos from the 10th show not only more lanes, but better signage at the berm. Radios tied beachmasters to troop leaders, and spacing at 2-vehicle intervals became an enforced rule, reducing the fatal clog that invites mortar fire. The doctrine friction between engineer-led and infantry-led breach gave way to a clear sequence where engineers owned the first minutes and infantry followed along routes, not across open sand. The opponent kept adapting inside shrinking space. German field guns pulled back along the Caen Canal roads and tried to catch traffic just behind the berm, where flails offered less value. Mines shifted to culverts and side streets, but bridges and AVRE blades worked inland as well as on the sand. Petards cracked walls, ARKs crossed cuts, and gun tanks used smoke to disrupt new arcs. Unit AAR pages for the 13th 18th Hussars list smoke fired to time a bridge lay near Hermanville on the 8th of June, proof that combined drill outpaced piecemeal countermove. Another limit was production and maintenance. Production tallies for May show only so many AVRE and flail conversions complete before sailing day. Every loss on the beach strained a finite pool. Maintenance cards track chain wear, bearing heat, petard tube life, and skirt seam leaks, and each line implies a spare that must exist in a truck already ashore. Ferry and rail manifests had to keep pace, and sometimes they did not. When storms hit on the 19th, the ports of Arromanches and the open beaches handled what they could, but some lanes starved while ships rode it out at sea. The cost is a quiet beat that sits beneath the method. Crews were tired by the 7th and the 8th of June. Hands cut by chain pins and petard bombs worked slower. Vehicles that drowned engines in salt water demanded new oils and checks that took hours in sand. A production tally cannot tell the story of a man kneeling in surf to seat a bridge pin, but maintenance cards can hint at the rate by counting parts consumed. Each lane opened on paper is a sum of those costs paid under fire and spray. Doctrine friction lingered but narrowed. American forces weighed the lessons from Sword and Juno and adopted several refinements by late June, including closer DD launches and more bulldozer-led clearance tied to marked routes. By July in Brittany and along the Channel ports, mixed packets of engineer armor appeared more often in assault waves, though the catalog never matched Hobart's full stack. The long-term counter, moving the fight away from beach belts into bocage and city blocks, was a German choice forced by the breach's success. On mined sands, the old wall rule did not recover. Myth versus evidence closes the loop again. It is easy to say special armor alone won lanes. The witness objects, decoded signals, AAR pages, ship's log lines, maintenance cards, and aerial photographs show a ledger of limits and fixes. Sea and distance cut survivability for DDs, chain heat and wear throttled flails, petard stocks ran tight, bridges settled into soft sand and needed cribbing. Refinements came by date and by line item, not by slogans, and each small change multiplied the method's reach. Immediate outcomes appeared in hours and then in days. On the 6th of June, 1944, taped lanes on Sword put armor through Hermanville and along the Ouistreham road toward the Caen Canal. On the 7th, more lanes at Juno fed Courseulles and Bernières, while flails and AVRES opened fresh exits as the tide shifted. On the 8th, Gold's routes reached Arromanches and anchored the work that would build Mulberry Bey, the artificial harbor the British called Port Winston. Unit AAR pages and aerial photos from those dates stitch a clear pattern. Lanes multiplied, bridges held, and traffic flowed inland on class-marked spans. The operational effect began at brigade scale and rose to corps. With lanes open early on Sword and Juno, infantry brigades pushed to road junctions that became the first choke points for German counterattack. Decoded signal summaries on the evening of the 6th report confusion in coastal headquarters near Caen, because armor was heard behind dunes where mines were expected to hold everything at the waterline. The method did not give Caen in a day. It gave exits and a timetable, and that timetable fed operations Epsom late in June and Goodwood in mid-July. Movement over mined sands had become a drill, not a gamble. Cross-channel logistics grew into the main engine. Ferry and rail manifests show trains of AVRE spares, flail chain sets, petard bombs, and bridge cribbing material moving from depots to ports on the south coast in steady runs. Ships' log lines record cycles in days, not weeks, because the distance from Portsmouth and Southampton to the Normandy beaches could be crossed and recrossed inside a weather window. By the 10th of June, 1944, tens of thousands of tons of stores had crossed the beaches, and Mulberry Bee began to take shape at Arromanches. The tapes on the sand, the chalked class numbers on bridge noses, and the white boards at beachmaster posts made the beaches into a port system. On Juno and Gold, the exits also shortened the travel time for medical evacuation and repair. Maintenance cards show flails stripped and repinned within a day of landing and petard tubes regauged at forward points rather than sent back to Britain. A logistics vignette from Arromanches on the 12th of June notes a crate of chain links stamped for Westminster Dragoons delivered to a beach control point and signed for with a pencil already wet with spray. The stack's power was cumulative. Every day the method repeated, the inland timetable stabilized, and infantry battalions met their rendezvous with armor on roads rather than in mine belts. The long tail of outcomes reaches past Normandy. At Walcheren on the 1st of November, 1944, the same family of tools, flails, petards, and bridges, worked along flooded causeways and seawalls, proving the stack was not a one-beach trick. In the Scheldt approaches later that month, AVRE blades and ARKS turned wet gaps into roads that could bear trucks into Antwerp's lifeline. Decoded signal summaries from German naval commands in the estuary complained that engineer armor negated obstacles faster than new belts could be sewn. The old rule had been repealed not by a single blow, but by a repeatable sequence. Post-war doctrine carried the imprint. British engineering units retained AVRE roles into the age of the Centurion, and mine clearance evolved into line charge systems that did with rockets and hose what chains had done with steel and patience. The American catalog grew its own forms, from dozer blade Shermans to modern breacher vehicles that used plows, line charges, and rollers. Training schools wrote the same plain lessons into manuals: count your clearances, mark your lanes, pace your spacing, and protect your bridge noses with smoke. Range tables and maintenance cards changed, but the habit of reading them did not. The legacy also crossed oceans and decades. Amphibious operations in the Korean Peninsula in 1950 and on the Falklands in 1982 revisited the problem of mined beaches, surf, and walls. Each time, the engineers at the point read a version of Hobart's method. Abroad or at home, the rule that mines and rails stop tanks only until the first lane opens had become normal. It had a cost and it had limits, but it had a proven shape that staffs could plan around in hours and not in guesses. A myth says Normandy's beaches yielded because defenders were weak or distracted. Evidence argues the opposite. The 716th Infantry Division had emplacements, arcs, and belts. The belts bit hard wherever the stack did not land or the sea forbade a short swim. But where the stack arrived and the sea allowed, the lanes opened in measured tens of minutes, bridges seated within a quarter hour, and armored traffic reached roads that doctrine had meant to deny until afternoon. Unit AAR pages, ships' log lines, aerial photos, and production tallies hang together on those days in June. Costs and strains remain written in the ledger. Production tallies for May and June show the finite pool of conversions and the work hours welded into each. Maintenance cards capture chain wear, bearing heat, petard tube swaps, and skirt seam repairs that ate nights while days ate fuel. Crews carried the fatigue into July's operations on the Caen approaches, and the pool had to be rotated or rebuilt. Yet the system's very ordinariness after D-Day, tapes and boards, chalk marks and spacing, log lines and manifests, became its final proof. The operational shift was decisive even if not dramatic to the naked eye. With mined beaches turned into structured entry points, Allied staffs could push the bulk of their effort toward inland fights rather than spending days in surf against steel hedgehogs. That freed artillery, freed air effort, and freed the transport trains that had to choose between supplies and replacement parts. It also forced the opponent to spend engineers on rear belts in hedgerow country rather than on the shore, a trade that favored the side with more bridging and more fuel. By late summer 1944, the beaches of Normandy were busy roads rather than battlefields. Arromanches Mulberry Bee worked through storms that destroyed its American twin at Omaha, and the tapes laid in June had long since been replaced by graded exits. The method had created a permanent breach in a rule once written in concrete. At Hermanville-sur-Mer in the cool mornings of September, the surf still rolled across the same sand where lanes had opened on the 6th of June. The white tape was gone, the pickets removed, the bridges dismantled or moved inland. The map pin sits quiet now, but the rule it broke did not return.